So yesterday we spent some time talking about, or like just diving into how we would utilize Node, how we would utilize ESLint, how we would utilize ES6, and how to test our code in terms of like utilizing our front end structures, like utilizing Mocha, for example. Right? Yesterday we used Mocha. Today I'm going to kind of take us through that process in a much more like quick format. And we're going to slowly build up to having something show up on a page and utilize all the different, or at least some of the packages that we had installed yesterday. So I'm going to go through that with you kind of step by step. So I created a folder here called My First Node App. We are utilizing Node. It's not necessarily a full-on Node app, but just named that folder as such, okay? We're gonna basically be building our own like little front-end app right here, okay? And by app, I just mean like a one-page thing, right? So here you see there's like literally nothing in there. The first thing I wanna do is like get us to utilize NPM first, right? Because that's going to be the thing very similar to Ruby's gems, right? Or bundler that helped us get all of the gems that we needed in Ruby to set up the whatever app we were using, right? So the first thing I want to do is basically initialize NPM here. So I can do NPM init. And what that's going to do, it's going to take us through the process of creating a node, like a package.json file that's going to help communicate what node packages we have, et cetera, right? It's kind of like building our gem file, but for Node, okay? So everybody see what's going on here. So it's going to walk us through creating this package. So you can press enter. Everything in the parentheses are defaults. So it's just taking the name of my folder. That's fine. Version 1.0, like this is our first version of creating this app I'm making, right? So that's fine. Description, I can just say my first new app. Okay, entry point. At this point, we are going to shift this a little bit to utilizing a source folder for entry point and not just one full file. Okay, so I'm going to say source index.js for that. And then test command, we'll just leave blank for now. We're going to fill that in later, but for now, we'll just leave it blank. And then Git repository, we're not setting up a Git repository remotely right now, so we can leave that blank. And then keywords, you don't really need that, so we can just leave that blank. Author, I'm going to put Carrell. And then license, if you wanted to, you can change the license name, but for now, you can just keep it default. And these will just set up some default things in a package.json file. So just like we saw yesterday, we have this package.json file that holds all this information, including our scripts that we would be running. So some of us yesterday ran you know, Npm Start, Npm Test, that kind of thing, okay? And these are the scripts that are going to help us run those things. So if, for example, I wanted to do Npm Test, it's basically going to echo exactly what was written in that script, okay? So now we have something that's going to assume that we have a source folder and an index.js file. So I'm going to make my source folder, and then I'm going to make my JavaScript file inside of that source folder. So now we have this going on in here. And what we're going to do today is build a just one-page document, or document, DOM document, right? That's going to show where everybody's name and their hometown and their sign, okay? So I'm going to build that first. Now, if that's something that's not really going to change a lot, what kind of variable would I use to make that? Const. Okay, so I'm gonna set up const, say deltas. And then in this, we're gonna create an array of objects. Okay, so first we can start by setting up one, and then I can just multiply that. So name, we're gonna have John. What's your hometown, John?
Charlotte.
Oops, there. Okay, and then what's your sign?
Astrological sign?
Yes.
Gemini.
All right. So I'm just gonna take this and multiply it because that's easier to do. What?
Changes.
Oh, yeah, maybe it changed. Okay, so who's next? We have Deja. What's your hometown, Deja? Cool. And what's your son? Okay. Do you want to be in the deltas for today? Okay, cool. Which?
Jake. Toledo, Wyoming.
Not J-O-H. Okay, and then John, hometown, New York. What? What? No, you said New Jersey. Oh, missing. Okay. Okay, Taylor. Wait, it's KS. Isn't it? Is it?
KS.
Oh, we need to. All right, I'm just building this. Okay. Nikki.
Yes.
Gemini? Oh, it's already there. Okay. Well, what? Thank you. Typing skills. And me. From Denver. Oh. Woohoo! Okay, so we built a thing. We have an array of objects, right? And whole bunch of commas messed up, things out of array, right? Like, how do I figure out how to what was good and what was bad? I use ESLint, right? So if I want to use ESLint, then that's going to be something that I need to install. Okay, so in this case, we are going to install ESLint natively to this app, right? We're not installing it globally. So let's see if we can recall how. So we would do npm install ESLint lint -- save. So if we wanted to install it globally, we would do -G, but -- save is going to save a binary version of the folder for us to utilize that node package specifically to the scope of this app. Okay?
Why do you do it globally?
So globally might be useful for some things that you're going to use like all the time. In this case, we're just going to do it for this particular app. Once you're not really going to be utilizing these by themselves as their own packages for very much longer, right? Like by the end of today, you're going to be utilizing Create React App, which has all these things. So you're not really going to point out like, oh, I want to use this one ESLint. Like I want to use this one node package. Okay, so sounds good here. So here it's just giving us a warning, which we don't need to worry about. But notice it added 138 packages like that are dependent for ESLint to work. So if we go back to not only having our package.json, but now we have a package lock. And that's because this file got changed down here. So now we have dependencies set up for our app to run. So similarly, when we had our gem file, right? Like when we did bundle install on any new repository that we downloaded, we had to do bundle install, which installed the dependent gems that were needed for that app to run. Similarly, somebody would do npm install when they downloaded this app because we indicated that ESLint is a dependency of this app to run. Make sense? So now that we have ESLint, we're going to want to run ESLint, and because we did -- save, we have to reply to it specifically from, or we have to ask for it specifically from this app scope, and then we want to have it look at our source index.js file. Ooh, so there's already one thing, unexpected token on line 12. So you go here, look at line 12. Oh, we see that there's a bunch of commas that need to get added. So I'll just add a comma to all of them. You can let that run. Now we have a quadrillion errors. A lot of it has to do with indentation and quotes. So those will be things that I want to fix. So a lot of it has to do with, so what was the first one that said? Expected indentation of one tab found 2 spaces. So a lot of this has to do with this tabs, tab. Oh, I think it says on line 2. So expected indentation of one tab found 2 spaces. Oh, you know what we didn't do? We didn't initialize our ESLint. So we need to do this. So init is going to initialize the configuration of ESLint. Yeah. So, there we go. That's actually it. Okay, so we're going to use a popular style guide. We're going to use Airbnbs. Right now, we're not going to use React, and I'll put it in a JSON file. Okay, so that's going to bring in Airbnb's particular style guide and set up a configuration file so that it's going to help us make sure that all that stuff is configured the way that we need it to. So now, if I run this.
So the JSON file is really just a JavaScript object.
Yes, JSON means JavaScript object notation. So it's a particular format for setting up an object in JavaScript, yes. Cool. And that's something that we're going to be utilizing more and more as we get into dealing with React, dealing with APIs in a much more heavy fashion, right? A lot of that like consistent standard communication between interfaces of one server to another is most easily done through JSON, like just parsing JSON back and forth. Okay, so that helped a lot. Wow. And we have some missing trailing commas and some multiple spaces. So one particular thing that you'll see here are the lines. We have what the error is, a larger description, and then we have the kind of like the rule name. Okay, so if I needed to understand what was going on here, I can always just Google any of these names, and it would give me more information about what the rules are for that. So did anybody Google the comma dangle rule yesterday? You have to deal with that? The console one? So if we're using Airbnb's JavaScript rules, we can do ES.
The last on the list is going to be comma now. Yeah. So you need not to sign. Like an extra comma.
Yeah. So so trailing, yeah. So trailing commas, they're just kind of describing why you would utilize that. And they also give the opportunity to say, like, you don't have to, or you can like basically configure the rules as well. If you find that, you know, there are rules, obviously these rules were made for a reason, right? So it's best to at first say like, oh, okay, why is this a rule? Read over on those rules and then make a decision as to whether or not that's like really important for your code base or not. As we go into working for companies that have large code bases, there's also a set of standards that people want to uphold or style guides that they want to uphold. So that's largely going to be up to your like engineering managers to uphold that style guide. So oftentimes you'll find these kinds of rule sets very similar to Rubocop with Ruby integrated into the build process for when you do code reviews or when you actually try and do PRs to submit your code. So whether you like it or not, or whether you can have that conversation with your engineering manager to have a better understanding of your code, making sure that it's clean and up to the style guide that your company upholds before you actually submit your code. So it's really important to keep those things in mind. But since we're not working for an engineering manager, we're working for ourselves. We can do whatever we want. So if we don't want comma dangle, then we're not going to use comma dangle, right? So in order for us to make sure that we're not using that, we can utilize this documentation when not to use it. See, you can turn it off if you're not concerned. So great, how would I turn it off? So these options are set up here. So we would be able to basically disallows trailing commas. Okay, so we can pretty much use this thing. And this would actually end up in where? Did anybody change a rule yesterday in ESLint? So you're going to change that here. So right now we have just extends. We would want to also have rules. don't know why you're fading. Okay, but no, you're not hating. Okay, so we can remove this or because we don't need that in this case. Or this. This goes to this. This goes here. That's an extra one. Yeah. Okay. So once we have that rule set up, if we run this again, we only have 10 errors now. And that's around indentation and spacing and that kind of stuff.
Does it never mean that it always catches the error, or does that mean it never calls the error?
So here we have never disallows trailing commas.
So anytime it sees a trailing comma,
yes. So you can also use object to configure this rule. Each of the following options can be set. So we could say ignore. Let's see if that is valid. So value ignore should be equal to one of the allowed values. Value ignore should be object. Okay.
it would have to be like a function or something like that. Maybe something else in that comma, like a function or whatever.
Yeah, for now I think we'll just leave it at that. Common variable error. Oh, so I can see like in arrays we can say ignore inside of this. So this can help further indicate like it's okay in a it's okay in arrays, but like not in a function, for example, that kind of thing. Okay, so that's back to being okay. Great. So besides wanting to clean this up, we can go forward with our work. So now that we have this figured out, we want to do something with this const, right? Because that's also one of the errors, right? Like there we have unused vars. We want to make sure that we're utilizing these vars. In our case right now, we want to display this onto the screen, right? But in order for us to display something onto a screen, like we can use node, and we can show node on here. So if we wanted to, we could just well, first we want to kind of set up a class, right? So these are all Delta people. So I'm going to basically declare class person. Okay, and inside of this, we can utilize the constructor class, where we're taking name, hometown, and son. Okay, and then inside of this, we're going to say this dot say name, name, start hometown, and this dot sign side. Okay, so in this case, when we are using this keyword, whenever we create a new person, we're basically setting these properties as the attributes that are going to be brought in when we initialize a new person. Okay, so we have we can use this constructor function. We can also create something inside the class person that any person object can do, like say hello. Okay, so in this case, we are going to return, or probably console, let's say return. We'll use backticks here. Okay, this is, and then we can use string interpolation. This that name, cloud, start sign, from this dot hometown. Okay, so we have the constructor that's going to set the attributes to the person object, and we also have a function that person object will be able to do upon initialization, right? So if I wanted to create const, let's think of another person. Sarah, right? Say new person, and we give it those attributes. Sarah. Hometown. So I think we're just bringing it in like this. Okay, Sarah, and Chicago, Illinois, and what's the other? Okay, so let's say console log Sarah dot say hello. Okay, so to run that, we would use node source index JS, right? What happened? Oh, good eye. Thank you for that. Yeah, so JavaScript's using $ for string interpolation. Okay, so we're getting our string back, right? But we don't want to basically make a new const for every single person, right? We want to iterate through that process. Additionally, we don't just want to see this on just the node screen. We want to see it on the in our browser, right? So if we wanted to see that in our browser, why don't we figure this out first? So we have const Sarah and we have console log. How would I want it if I wanted to do it with everyone, not just one person? I want to do it with everyone. So we're going to want to loop over things, right? But we want to utilize what happened? So we're going to want to utilize functions to iterate over all the arrays, right? Or iterate over the array of objects. So we could do for a person. So instead of all of this, so we can say for person in deltas. Const person in deltas.
Does it change? First will be different this time.
Okay. So for let person in deltas. Okay. Now we can also use a. Yeah, I'll just do that. Okay. We can use it this way, or we can do for each. So for now we'll just do we'll do for and see what happens.
Does that work for array?
Yes, it does. So for loop, where we're going to basically say const person instance equals new person with person in it. Oh, where we were going to take person.name, person.sign, and person.hometown, and person.sign. Right? And then we want to person instance, say console log. Person.instance, just to confirm that it's doing what we want. Okay. Okay, so we have all the people. We have name and hometown and sign undefined.
Maybe happening. No.
When we call new person, yeah, so person in deltas, we're calling that in here. So what if we console log person here first? Let's see what happens. So this is an index here. So this might not be the way that we want to do it. So why don't we do this with for each? So we'll say deltas dot for each. And here we can take advantage of an arrow function. So we can say for each person, or we can, yeah, let's say for each delta, so we're not using person, right? And here you actually need to add this. So we're going to create an arrow function. Okay, so everybody notice what I'm doing here? So like this is an arrow function that's taking an argument delta out of the deltas. For each delta, we're going to do something with that. Okay, so we can still do const person instance equals new person, where we're bringing in delta dot hometown and delta dot side. Okay, and then we should be able to console the person instance. Okay, so now we have all of our peoples, the people objects, and they have all the appropriate information. So instead of doing that, we can say person instance dot say hello. Hey, thanks everybody. How you doing? Cool. So now we know we can do that in Node. We want to do that on the screen. But in order for us to do that, we need to have an HTTP server for us to be able to communicate with our browser, right? That conversation needs to happen between an HTML document, JavaScript file, and the browser. So in order to do that, we're going to need to bring in another Node module. And it's one that you worked with yesterday. We will npm install HTTP server -- save. So that's going to install an HTTP server module that we can use, or an npm package, right? And while I'm doing that, what's something that I need in order to make this happen? Notice creating the HTML document, right? So notice now we have these second dependency on our app, and then we're going to create touch source index.html document. So in order for me to just double check that my server is going to work, I'm just going to set h1, say that created, okay, and then in order for us to run HTTP server, we can either write it out or we can go back to our package.json. And it seems like we're not utilizing scripts enough, right? So we should probably set some run scripts that we can use. So if we want to use start, that's a keyword one, but we just giving it the information about what to do in order to start it. So this is a point where we can probably use HTTP server, and then we'll give it the folder source, right? So we can take that file and that folder and then run the pages as needed. Okay. Additionally, we've been running Node to kind of see how this works locally. So I'm going to make one called local, just because, and that's going to take on, what have I been running? This node source index.js. It's annoying to have to keep repeating yourself, right? So it's like, may as well create a script for that. And then we have start, we have test. Oh, the other thing we've been doing is checking our ESLint, right? So we can also create something in here. And then we can go back to our terminal and double check. What was it that we were using this long set of code to do that? Well, I could just have it set up so people can just utilize that. So now, instead of using this long script of stuff, I can just type npm run lint. So it's letting us do that same process. Okay? So we set up npm run server. So why don't we do that? So npm start. So some of these are keywords that are already set up with npm, and some of them are scripts that we create ourselves and we name ourselves. So test and start are two keywords that are already native to npm being utilized. So all you have to do is use npm start as opposed to npm run start. And that's going to utilize our HTTP server node module and start up basically localhost for us. One thing to note here is it's both available locally on my computer, but it also gives me a public, it utilizes my public, like my IP address at this point, which you can only really hit when you're on, when you're on the same Wi-Fi. But those are the two different IP addresses that you're seeing here. So let's go to our browser. You ping this. Okay, so we know that this is working because we see our hey there. Okay, and now I want to get this working onto from our index.js, right? Like I want this stuff to actually end up in our index.html. So I'm going to refresh this to have this stuff in here. Okay, and then I'm going to join. And then we want to basically set it up such that our JavaScript is going to run here. So I need to set up a script file for that, right? Okay. So right now, if I ran this, and again, it's continuously watching this, so it's going to change as we run it. So we can continue to keep this running in the background if we wanted to. I'm actually going to kill it because there's some stuff that we need to do in our JavaScript file. So right now, we have our class person running a constructor function and a say hello function. What you're going to see often in React, and something that you can utilize as well, is a render function, right? So right now, we want this to, like, this is returning something that we want to see on the screen, but render is oftentimes going to be something you use to actually set up how you want it to be seen on the screen. So why don't we create a render function here. And we'll say, well, let me use a little bit of code here. Okay. So one second. Oh, let's see. Okay. So that's right. Okay, so that's a render. Okay, so right now this is just a function that's going to basically let us take say hello as a set of text, and then if we're running it in Node, or if we're running it in, if it's not undefined, which means that a document in fact exists, right? An HTML document, we're going to fill the document with this text. Otherwise, we're just going to console log it. Okay, so that's what's happening here. So in order for us to do this, we need to utilize render now. So down here, we were utilizing console log to do that. So instead, we want to do person instance.render. Okay. So now that we have that, let's go back to Npm Start, set up our stuff, and see if it pushes our stuff to the screen. And it's not. Let's figure out why. That's for each delta on this person. Person instance.render. Does anybody see where we might be having the problem? What happened? So here we're setting document body inner HTML plus equal text. Yeah. Say it again?
Coming out in the console, it's like something that I'm with us sitting here. You check the console. And
oh, sure. Let's see. So it looks like it's running. Yeah, so let's see. So if type of document is not undefined, document body inner HTML is text, which is fine. Else, console log text.
If you unclick undefined, that changes it.
You're saying to do it like that. Let's find out. Oh, there you go. Okay. Cool. And then, given that this is all string stuff, right? This is document body HTML text. Okay. So I wonder if I could set it. No, I'll just leave it like that. Okay, so now we have stuff on the screen, right? The last thing we would need to do is set up testing, because we wouldn't want to have an app that only has stuff showing on the screen. We would want to test it, right? But you can see now how, like, oh, this is a lot of stuff that we're doing just to like have stuff on the screen. It's not even coming up the way we would probably potentially want it to look, right? Like, we want to set it up so that it's utilizing appropriate HTML, and so it's gonna like take a lot of work. but let's shore this up just to have like more readable code and testing, and then we can take a break and get started on like what this looks like when we're utilizing Create React App as opposed to trying to like build our own app from scratch, right? So I'm going to kill this server. If I can. Okay. So inside of here, we just built like a whole bunch of stuff, and we're like referring to a whole bunch of stuff, right? We don't necessarily want to have a class inside of this. If eventually we'll want to create more classes, that kind of thing. Is just starting to get really messy in terms of this one index page, right? Index should really just basically be a runner for like what's going on for right now, right? So we want to encapsulate the person itself, the person class itself. So instead of having it in index, we're going to have a person.js file that's going to hold all that information in itself. So once I have that, I can basically take all this information here, okay, and then put it inside of its own space. So now I have Instructor, say hello, and render all together. Okay. Now, in order for me to have this class available to the other pages, I have to do one extra line of code, which is exporting this to be accessible. So we'd use export default person. So then in the other files, so index.js at the top, I'm basically going to import person from person.js. So I should be able to npm run local and still get, oh, we're getting the stupid import. So in order for us to actually run this, we need another node module, which we had used yesterday, the Babel node module, which is going to help confirm that, like make sure that our import module functionality is going to work. So you can see how like, that's going to be really stressful. We're not going to do that right now. So instead, like we're getting up to a place where like that's not going to work very well, right? So I'm just going to get one last thing set up from our packages, which is npm install mocha chai save. So npm install mocha and chai -- save. It's going to actually take, it's going to pull both of those npm packages at once. And now you can see in our package JSON, we have chai, ESLint, HTTP server, and mocha. And then we have these dev dependencies that are particular to ESLint. Okay. And then if we wanted to start testing our stuff, we can touch index.test.js. And I'm just going to show you what that looks like instead of actually going step by step through it, so we can take a break. So you would basically import mocha and import chai into your test file. You would also want to, oh, this is me trying to figure out how to make sure that we can use, so this would actually be imports person from person.js. And then very similar to our spec, we would be utilizing a describe block, an int block, and then you would, given a certain set of data, you can make the expectation that this is going to be an okay thing to do. And similarly here, we should expect that this, when we run say it again?
When you create the index.place.js, is this place come up?
No, this is not already in there. So this would be something you would have to write. So these are files you would have to, like these tests you would have to write. It's not going to be automatically coming up. Okay. Something like that, right? That's what it would say. So we would basically run these, and then instead of having the tests stuff here, saying like echo error, blah, 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 we would basically have Mocha source. Would you use the whole directory or just the file? Okay. So yeah, so you'd basically say, hey, Mocha, run this one test file. In which case we can say npm test now. We're getting the same error because it's trying to ask for person and not allowing us to do that. Or now it's not letting us import Mocha from Mocha. So we're like basically at a block here. So this is a good time to get a break. When we come back, we're going to actually go through the process of utilizing Create React App to get something started. Does anybody have questions so far about like all the steps that we took to make something happen? Help clarify what y'all did yesterday. It's pretty much everything you did in like little chunks all at once. Okay, cool. I'm gonna pause the video.
Oh, it's almost impossible
all right.
to watch football.
So
but you have like full mission. Like every game is on. Wow, you gotta watch. And they cost what?
Right. We're all back, ready to go? Okay, so now we are going to learn how to utilize Create React App. So React in itself is a framework that you can utilize that's basically a front-end framework utilizing React, right? React was created by Facebook, and Facebook also created the Create React App. There was a lot of configuration before this that really stopped people up from utilizing React, dealing with Webpack and how they configure all this junk. So they were like, look, we can just create this generator for building a new React app that's just like a skeleton like you can use to start on your journey for creating a React app. So you can find that on GitHub. And in order to get started, we're just gonna do basically this process. So we're gonna npm install globally create React app. This is something that we've been saying like don't do it globally, but in this case, it's something that you're gonna be utilizing frequently, so it's fine to globally install this. Okay, so Where's my, okay, here we go. So we're just going to npm install globally, create -react -app, okay? And that's going to fetch all the different node packages that are necessary to run create React app. Okay. I feel like this is probably something that's happening because I've already downloaded create React app. So let's just confirm that by doing create React app on something. So in order to do create React app or create a new React app, okay, you, very similar to Rails new, create React app and then the name of the app, okay. Okay, so let's do create React app. And then I'm just going to name it that. Okay, so it's going to go through the process of setting up a React app inside this folder, my new React app. Once it's done, we should be able to cd into that folder and do some things to it. See if there's any other things to say about React right now. Once we go into our folder, we're going to be able to do npm start. We'll look at the package JSON and see the scripts that are already set up there. It's going to have things like an HTTP server for us to utilize already. It's going to be utilizing localhost 3000. It also has the capability of setting up the deployment process to package everything up for deployment. Yeah, it's already going to have Babel, so we're going to be able to utilize our latest ES6 features without having any problem. It's already going to have a lot of like the Webpack kind of stuff set up for you. Still running, so I'm going to go through this real quick. When we get our app set up, we're going to have this set of folders in it. We're going to have the README, which makes a lot of sense. We're going to have that node module folder that we've seen with our NPM projects already. We'll have package.json that'll kind of say, like, this is your create React app. Set up all the scripts and have the dev dependencies set up in there. We'll look at that. We're going to have a gitignore file already. And then we have these two folders. So we've been asking you to create a source folder because that's kind of like the convention that React app has in it already. And we also have public folder. And public folder is basically where you'll see the HTML file set up, which is going to be like the public-facing point at which people can access your React app. It's also going to have a favicon, and we'll see that in a second in this manifest.json. These files we'll talk about in more detail when this finishes. Oh, great. So takes forever because it's downloading 1,264 packages for you. Yes. And we're utilizing a lot of different packages. Oh, wait. 1,266 packages, I'm sorry. And we have npm start as a command we can use, npm run build, npm test, and npm run eject. So those are already scripts that we don't have to build that are already set up. So look at this. It's happy hacking to us. Okay. Oh. 1 second. Let me get this over here. There we go. Okay. So, wait, that's not it. Oh, that's my whole folder. Never mind. That's not what we want. Let me do this one more time. We need to CD into my new React app first. Now we want to subline into it. Okay. Here you are. Okay, so just as we mentioned, we have our package.json. It's showing our dev dependencies and our main dependencies, React and React DOM. Now, these two dependencies are all kind of set up in this package lock. Like, these are all the actual dependencies that are needed. So React takes quite a bit of work away from you having to kind of configure what needs to get done in order for something to run. And as mentioned in here and in our stuff here, if we wanted to just get started and see what's going on in here, we can just do npm start. And it's going to start the development server already for us. And it's actually opening, it opened up the browser for us. And there we go. So it's using that little favicon. We have our whole React app stuff set up. Okay, so, and this is already this is set up so that we can continue listening on the network, and it's going to watch the folders as they change and make those changes to the browser automatically. So it's pretty cool to be able to make those changes and see them pretty immediately. So if we go from the front to the back, right, we have this index HTML document that is what's being shown to the screen. Okay. And then we have div ID root here. Okay. And then if we look at our app.js, oh no, index.js. So we've been working with index.js, right? So index.html, index.js, right? So this index.js is the file that's basically pulling a lot of stuff together. It's doing import React. It's also importing React DOM, which is basically the ability for us to create a virtual DOM over our DOM object. And it's the one that's basically communicating directly with the DOM to display and react to all the things that we're doing on the subsequent back end, which is like the work that we're doing in React, right? And then we're importing our index.css, our app, and then we're rendering app inside of root and registering a service worker. Service worker is like for progressive web app stuff, which you don't need to think about too much right now. Okay, so if we look at app, which is from here, app. Okay, we have one line of code that we're importing React. We're also importing, this is very similar to the way that we were looking at the destructuring yesterday, right? This is importing particularly the components part of React So it's a piece of work that we're going to be utilizing. And then further down, when we are setting up our app class, we're also extending it with the component structure that already exists with React. So in the similar way that in the past we had a class that we were building in Ruby, right? We had like a class person in Ruby, but it was just a plain Ruby object, okay? And then we inherited from Active Record Base, right? That was basically pulling in Active Record's capability of modeling and communicating with the database at that point, right? We were extending the class's capabilities with Active Record. In the same way, we are extending this app class with the all the behaviors and functionalities of the component class within React. Okay, so just like we had before, we have a render function, and the render function is, again, like really integral to anything you'll see on React or within React. You'll basically be using render for, like render's one of the most important functions that you'll see. Something you might notice as well is it looks a lot like HTML, right? But it is actually not HTML. This is what is called JSX. And JSX is basically a, you can say it's a combination between HTML and JavaScript, okay? So it's basically utilizing HTML structuring and embedding JavaScript into it. Or you can say it's JavaScript with HTML embedded in it. Very similar to ERB, but it's particular to JavaScript and React, okay? I don't think so. I can't say that only React uses it, but it's a very big component to React. I feel like Angular also utilizes it when you see classes that have, or when you see HTML that doesn't have, like I've never seen a, for example, if we're building like a person, like I've never seen a person element in HTML. But you'll see that in Angular. You see like ng something or other. Okay, those are how Angular kind of like utilizes this functionality. But I don't know if it's specifically JSX. Okay, so what this is doing is what's being shown on the screen, right? We're returning this like larger app div. And we have our header, we have this logo that's being shown on the screen, we have that welcome to React, and then that get started sentence on the screen. So if we wanted to change this, you can see this. So if we were to change this, let's do that. So I didn't even have to go to the terminal to like double check or refresh. Like I didn't like go over here and click refresh the page. It's hot reloading whenever there's anything that's changed in this JavaScript file. And any of the files are changed, it's going to reload those components. Okay. So what we're gonna try and do is talk a little bit about this logo. Yeah, it's like actually it's a SVG. Yeah, this is a SVG file, and the logo itself, I think all that stuff is in public, or no, in app.css. That's where it's animating. So, yay, CSS, right? So that's actually happening because of CSS here. Oop. Spin infinite at 20 seconds in a linear fashion. I made it faster! Okay, lots of fun. So yeah, this is kind of where the CSS stuff is coming from. But outside of that, what we want to do is give you a little more understanding of the constructor function and the other piece of what we would utilize that for. So app right now is just giving us, you know, some like static information. But what we're going to do is use the constructor. And then we're going to bring in props. So props is a term you'll see quite a bit, and it's basically shorthand for properties. But constructor is also something that has already been initialized with component. So just with any inherited thing, we want to bring in the like parent's behavior and not override it. So we're going to do super props first, and then to introduce you a little bit to a concept called state. State is basically any given component's like current state as a class or as a particular item that's being utilized. So it's a way for not only properties to be passed, but it's also to like that's basically the property that will that you will utilize to set state, to modify or change that state. It's all going to be set up by utilizing this dot state. So right now we're going to try and basically create a button that we can see on the screen, and the idea is that we'll be able to get to a place where we have a button that we can click, and it's going to modify our information about how many times we've clicked that button, right? It's a very simple thing we can start. Okay, so in order for us to kind of hold that information about like how many times something was clicked, it makes sense for us to have an attribute or a property in here called click count. And at like the beginning of that state, it will start at 0, right? So it's really good, like we'll just have that set up there in our app. I don't know specifically what props brings down, but we can inspect what the component class has in React's documentation. That's one of the great things about having all this stuff open source, is that we should be able to, oh, this is just going to be like a basic thing. So we might need to actually go into React's documentation and look at how class is structured or component class is structured in itself. But we want to make sure that we don't block component from doing the work that we need it to do by not including super props in here.
State is a function.
It's a function. And it wouldn't be just in app, right? Right now it is.
And it's the state of, I think each class has.
Yeah. And right now we're only dealing with app, so there's no need to think about that elsewhere, right?
State is a special variable that has.
Yeah. So something, again, to keep in mind is like how much of this is JavaScript specific and how much of this is React specific. State in this case is React specific in like the way that we're utilizing it, right? Constructor is JavaScript specific because it's like how you set up a class. But the way we're using it in terms of like getting props and getting the component classes props, that's React specific. Make sense? Okay. So what we want to do, not in app.js, we want to get our, yes, app.js. Okay. So right now we want to do something. Why is this doing it? Okay, so instead of this app intro here, I'm just gonna change this to click the button. Okay, and then in here we're going to set up a button. Bah. So right now I'm writing HTML inside of this JavaScript file, but in reality I'm utilizing the capabilities of JSX to set up a button HTML item that is going to use JavaScript in it.
I guess my question is, we're on a homepage, correct?
Yes.
So is index not utilized in this case, just app? Something to do that. It's not indexes then.
You go back to index.
We're in app.js right now. And
Yes.
And that's our root or our homepage, but the index.js isn't.
So index.js is being used as kind of like a point to direct what's going on. So right now,
Rendering from the app, so we're using the app instead.
yeah, so we're rendering, so this is a good way to talk about this. App.js, at the bottom, we're export default app, right? So just like we did export default person, right? We're exporting app fully as a thing. And then in index.js, we're importing app from app, and then we're telling DOM to render this whole, this whole object called app inside this root. So we're saying document.get element by ID root. So if we look at our index.html, down here, we have the title, and then we have the no script, you don't need it, but then we have this like just tiny div element that says div ID of root, right? So from this div, everything is getting pulled into the page. And if we look at the information of this page, it's basically, there's root, and then we have our div class app, which is the whole app class, right? And then there's that header that is described in the render, right? Along with the intro, where I just wrote click the button, and then there's the little button, right? So at any time when I change this information, the terminal is compiling it and pushing it to the browser. Okay.
How many renders have you run to the whole app?
How many?
Renders. Like when you use a render, so when you read whatever you write, use a.
Sure. So render should be something that's used once per class, and we'll see that in a second. But you basically use render for every time you have a component that needs to render to the screen. So right now we just have one huge app component that's rendering everything to the screen. But the benefit of using React is that you're breaking down what goes on the screen, and you're letting those be modularized into smaller and smaller components. So if you think about any given app that you would want to build something on, you would think about every single one of those sections, and then every section inside of that, like to a very minuscule piece. So I can't think of anything right now in terms of.
What does this give us over to, for instance, like jQuery, and you click on something and just for anything, like it's just adding. I mean, what does this give us over if?
So jQuery might be something that gets utilized by. Trying to think of a site. Okay, so it gives us the capability of utilizing like all the things that need to get set up and rendered and organized in little pieces that you're not necessarily, like doing it only with jQuery is not going to be as powerful or fast or readable. So for example, we'll get to a place where, for example, you have a feeds component, and then you have like, I don't know what this, like a menu component or a nav component, and then you have like a featured post component or featured question or recommendations component, and then an individual recommendation component. So you can break those down very small pieces, and then you would dictate what logic needs to happen for each of those components. And then the larger app component, like a container component basically, would basically watch what's going on and react, and all of those pieces would update as needed. That makes sense. So okay, cool. So let's continue trying to build this button, because what I want to do is be able to like click this button and see some information about how many times I click this button. But right now it's just a tiny button. Oh, here it is, that's why. I was like, why can I see this? Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're going to modify our app.js. Okay, cool. Let's go. Oh, look, logo got broken. How did that happen? So now it's just logo going fast. Okay. All right. So what we need to do is, instead of saying 0 times, we want to actually call on this click count. So how do you think we might be able to do that? Yeah, so let's try and interpolate it first, right? So we do $. How would we ask for click count? And say this dot state dot click count. Okay, let's see if that works. Looks like we don't need a $sign. Okay. So something I didn't notice either is that
You still need the brackets.
yeah, you still need the curly brackets. So part of what might make this a little difficult to like understand is that these are not like being highlighted the way you want. So this might be something you would want to download. Is it's like a Babel package for you to be able to see better highlighting for what's going on, right? Because you might end up seeing things and be like, oh, this must be broken. But in reality, it's not. It's just being highlighted. It's right now it's being highlighted as JavaScript. So like this, for example, doesn't need to be highlighted. It's inside of this, inside of these brackets, right? Okay, so we have this state click count times, but right now it's just like it's clickable, but it's like not giving us any information. So we need to make a function, right? So before we make a function, how do we watch what is happening with this button, for example? How does JavaScript handle those kinds of things? Something like on click, right? So we have a whole bunch of JavaScript handler, yeah. So JavaScript event handlers are on events. So there are a lot of different ones. We can watch focus of something. We can watch something on blur. We can watch something on hover, on click, on all those things, right? On keyword change or key like a keyboard press on or keyboard press off. Just all these different ways that we can creepily watch people on the internet. Or just click on click buttons, right? So there's all these different events that are happening in the DOM, right, that we can keep an eye on and do things based on those events. So one way to do that is on click. So we can say on click equals, we're going to do something in here, something, on click do something, right? For now, say on click, maybe we just do console log output. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, so we have that. Everything looks like it's working okay. And then, oh, I used the wrong function. There we go. Okay. There we go. All right, so do that. Okay, so if I click the button, the hope is that on click, it will tell me that it didn't click. No! Why isn't it working? Let's see if, oh, interesting. So what happened here I didn't even click the button, and it said I clicked the button. Anybody have an idea? So in this case, console log is immediately firing this off. The parentheses aren't just for like the fact that we need to take an argument. It's actually something that is happening upon load, right? So we don't necessarily want to do that. So maybe we do something on click and we say, we'll make a function called track click or something like that. Okay, and then in here we want to make a function. So right here it's automatically like, hey, you said something that you don't even know what that is. So we need to actually build that, right? So track click is not defined, so we need to make that happen. So we say track click. And, oh, okay, make it happen. All right, so we have track click, and we need to do something. So in here, let's say console log. Okay, so for now, we're just console logging something. But maybe in here, it's going to wait until this on-click event has happened, and then run that event. I mean, run the function. Oh, I still have an error. Track click is not defined.
Or do we have to have the things to call it?
It might be that track click is defined here, but we need to, in the same way that we're using state, maybe we need to use this dot track click. Yes. Okay, so it didn't like that we had this. Or is our logo back? Our logo's back. Okay. So if we click this button now, yay, now we're getting this for how many times the thing got clicked, right? So now we need to actually bring some logic in here, right? We don't just want to get this track, this I got clicked. We actually want to fix it so that we are shifting the way that our stuff is getting updated, right? So we need to change click count itself, right? So in order for us to make this change, we have to actually change the state, and we use a particular function called set state. So let me get that set up real quick. Okay, so in here, what we're gonna do is this dot set state, and then we're going to basically bring the entire, oh no, wait. Like this, we're gonna do this whole thing like this. What we have to do is basically replace the current state, the whole object of what state is. So this whole thing is going to be changed in here. So instead of this dot click count, we're going to reset click count to be this dot state dot click count plus 1. Does that make sense just a little bit to everybody? So we're basically saying, ooh, violation. Okay, good, there's no issues. Okay, so now that we have that, we're basically saying when this on click, we're going to take track click, or we're going to call track click on ourselves, and then we're going to console log I got clicked, and then update the state. Okay, so that should, ooh, we got errors. All right, so we have this huge area. I was just like, it can't read property set state of undefined. Why is this undefined? 16 stack frames were collapsed. This dot state, this state. So here, maybe what we should do is figure out what this is before we.
You just do this dot state dot click count.
No, we cannot. Plus plus and plus 1 is not going to like keep us from blowing up, because our focus right now is the fact that this is undefined.
Oh, I mean, I think Alex was saying just just say dot click count plus 1. Since isn't that an instance of it, can we just iterate it?
No, you have to use this dot set state.
Oh.
So outside of that, why don't we console log what this is at that point before we go through this whole like things are broken here. I'm just going to do that. Did I do that right? Yes, command option. Give me my console. Okay. Yes, I know. Oh, you know what? I'm just gonna not put info those right now. Not have info. Okay, so. Oh wait, no, I do want info. Oh, no. Okay, so undefined. We already know that, right? So what's happening here when we are using this dot track click? Explain what's happening. We're already doing this dot track click. What we need to do is bind this. And I'll go back later on and explain how we can do this better. But right now, we want to basically bind the context of this and bring that context into the function, not the current context of this. We want to bring the context of this as it is in this moment. So we would bind this here, like that. State is available, but it is like, it's not that state is the problem, it's that this is a problem.
Binding it sets it so it goes down the level we need it at, right?
Yeah.
Whereas normally it's only like inside that scope.
Yeah.
Which doesn't exist in that function.
Yes. See, it's not going to happen. Okay, this is going to be confusing. The keyword this is going to be confusing for the time that we're doing this, time that we're working with our code. But don't worry, this will get easier. Okay, so, we changed it so that we're binding this and that context. So let's see if that helped. All right, so now we actually have the app object that we want. And from there, we know that we can ask for app state, and then we can ask for click count from there. So now that we know we have what we need, we can go back up to this and be like, this is actually what we want to do, and this is actually what we want to change, and you need to make it happen. Okay. So once we do that, blah, blah, one more time. Thank you, duplication. Okay. Okay. Now if I say I've been clicked 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Oh, I can do it all the times. We built a thing. Who's happy? Nobody? Only me? I'm really excited.
Disrupt Facebook.
We've just disrupted Facebook. Okay, so now you can click on this button and it will tell you how many times it was clicked. Very, very revolutionary things. Okay, but one thing we did was we built this track click and click count, and we're just building a lot of logic into app as a whole. Like should app really know about like what a button can do and how many times it's been clicked, and like what if I want to add like a paragraph or another thing or like 20 more buttons, or like how will I make sure that I'm not fixating so much on like how the app should work alongside all these components when I can really just pull that out into its own thing, right? We still want to make sure that we are practicing our object-oriented principles by having things pulled down into their own single components or their own like single responsibility for what can happen. And we can do that with React as well. So now that we have this functionality set up, we want to try and make sure that we are doing that kind of single responsibility. So I'm going to kill this server real quick. And what I'm going to do is cd into source. And now we have app and we have index. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull out this whole like button logic that we have. Into its own thing. One second. Okay, so I'm going to do something touch open components.js. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pull the code that we wrote in terms of track click and the button piece itself into its own thing. Okay, so in here you can do plus. Oh, actually, we can just take .js. Let's do it this way. Okay, so I think we'll still need to import React. And at this point, this is going to import, like we're going to import button component into app. So we don't need to like do the vice versa of importing. Does that make sense? Like this is going to be like its own app and then its own JavaScript file, and then we're going to import this JavaScript class into app. Okay. So just before we finish, forget that. We'll just do that. Import button from button component. Yes. Okay. So all right. So now we're in button component. We're going to strip out all the stuff that we don't need. So we can change this to button component. We'll still want to utilize component here, right? So we'll still have this constructor props with super props. This state click count makes more sense. The button should know its click count. Okay, and then we have track click. We can still use this, and I got clicked, and this dot set state click count will still be relevant to this particular button, and we want to render instead of this entire thing. We just want to render the button. Okay, this returns to this. Oh, and that's the other thing you should keep in mind, that we are using return with parentheses, and it's like in-housing the entire thing that we're rendering out. Something we don't normally use in, like we don't see normally in JavaScript. You just say like return this one statement. You don't like normally enclose it all in parens. So then we're going to export default button component here. And that all still looks the same to me. But then in import button, this part, instead of this part here, we're going to
exporting button component and importing button. Is that right?
That's a good question. I can change it for right now. Save button components. We'll just leave it at that, right? We'll import button component from button component. That's true. Okay, so here, instead of having our whole button HTML stuff that we're setting up, we would have button component here. So we're replacing all of that logic that we just had in here. We can also remove, this is our app.js, right? So we don't need this .state. And technically, we don't need our constructor anymore because we're not using it for anything. We don't need track click because we're not using track click anymore. Now we have our render back. And that's our component, and then, okay. All right, so the intention is that
Our app that they, our index.js, we had like a render when in the triangle brackets. The app is like a /app. Why don't you use that for the button?
like this.
Like if you go to index.js.
So index.js is, so notice we're rendering this entire thing here,
yeah,
right? So index.js is basically taking app and rendering the app component by itself. The same way we're rendering, like we have button component here. So we're wrapping all this up into export default app. And then inside of index.js, we're just rendering app.
But I'm wondering why we don't need that kind of in order to import the app into here, we have to react on that render. Is that just when we add it to HTML?
Because this is actually rendering it to HTML. We're only putting the button component inside the app, which is going to get packaged up and sent out. So the only time you're going to need to utilize React DOM render is when you start utilizing multiple, like larger multiple pieces of either one page or multiple pages. So like, for example, we're going to create, if you create a like registration page, right? You're going to want to render registration as opposed to app, right? And that will be the like larger container component that holds the like smaller pieces. and then you would basically build all those pieces so that they're working separately, but they can be brought together in one piece. That's why the concept of a single page app is kind of like what's happening in this case. So let's confirm that it's working the way that we wanted. This is from the last time that we utilized it, right? It actually says the development server is disconnected, which is coming back again from that the hot reloading. It was like, hey, this is actually not going to work anymore. So let's npm start again. And now let's refresh the page and confirm that. Oh, it's still waiting. Starting the development server.
We'll make like a HTML and a JavaScript document. When we pull out our page, there will be a new JavaScript document or 6 scripts and.
Wait, say your question again?
Like for instance, that button will render in a separate JavaScript document.
No, it should be in the same.
Or it'll be like a script tag within
It's just gonna be in the same spot that we had before. Although technically, did I put it as? Unterminated JSX. I guess I can't use beyond. Unterminated? Oh, this is a, we'll talk about this as well, but you can only return, must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So you can only return one level of something in return. So I would have to basically, need to like set this as like a div class name button. I'll just do that. Yeah. So JSX, like these parents are basically such that like you can't return like an entire document. You're only supposed to return like one level of like one set of things. You can't have like two sibling levels of things returned. So you can set like one huge div and then like do a bunch of like nested things inside that div, but you can't return two divs. Does that make sense? Like you can't return two sibling things at one time. It has to be like one full object in its own. In which case we are returning one div of class button. Note the other thing is that you see here that's like indicating that this is not exactly HTML. We're using class name, which is JavaScript, not class, to set that kind of stuff up. Okay, so that's where we got those errors. Don't be scared of those errors. They're actually really, really useful, and you can find a lot of documentation just by reading up on the errors, which it gives it to you immediately. So if you ever are playing with something, it can immediately give you information. Okay, so our functionality still works. The cool thing about this as well is if you, for example, say we have a whole bunch of Well, I didn't even have to refresh. I don't know why I did that. But now I have all of these. I have all these different buttons that are holding their own state for like what's going on, right? Like it's not this button being clicked 9 times, it's not interfering with the state of this button being clicked 12 times. So it's really holding all this information and compartmentalizing it pretty quickly and effortlessly. Okay, so let's see. So let's see, the other thing that so that's like, this is like our first hello world thing that we've done, right, with React. The challenges that you have today should kind of like give you the capacity to be able to set up, create React app on your own and give you a little more instruction or at least practice with dealing with this whole like import export, exporting defaults like one object to another one, or at least giving you the capability of like diving in and understanding what all these pieces are. One thing that I'll note for myself is that I want to make sure that y'all have a better understanding of what was the thing that was confusing that we didn't have an answer about. Oh, binding this. Binding this. There's binding this for events. There's a particular way that we can modify how we bind or not have to do bind this when we utilize arrow functions or knowing when you can and cannot use arrow functions when it comes to utilizing this, because arrow function changes the way you deal with this. This dot this, I don't know what that would do. Let's see. I don't think this has a this at that point.
I mean, for the one that we had this dot, the binding.
Wait, you said
This dot save dot click now dot binding this dot this. Yeah.
This dot trick.
Maybe this dot this is also for the higher level.
I don't think it does because we're doing track click on this dot track click means that we are trying to refer to the app's function track click, or the buttons actually in this case, button component, right? Button component's function called track click, not the not this click events track click, and we're binding this context and bringing it into track click. So we're bringing app into its own function, which is weird, but I don't think you can just say this dot this. I don't think it'll do anything. Let's see. Yeah, it's like, I don't know what that is. Undefined, undefined, undefined. Cool. All right, so I'm going to stop this recording here, and